They were built to solve a crisis. Instead, they created new ones. Across America, some housing projects became cautionary tales, places where bad design, broken policies, and long-term neglect all crashed into each other. On paper, they promised safety, stability, and a fresh start. In reality, many turned into environments defined by fear, decay, and daily survival. What began as carefully planned communities slowly became concrete giants left to rot. These are the 7 projects that came to symbolize just how badly things can go wrong. The Magnolia Projects, later known as C.J. Pete, were established in 1941, boxed in by Louisiana Avenue, Magnolia Street, Washington Avenue, and LaSalle Street. In the beginning, there was nothing wild about them. They were calm, working-class housing, filled with families doing their best to survive. This was one of the first public housing developments ever built in the city, a symbol of progress at the time. Construction started in 1939 and wrapped up 2 years later. The man behind the design was Moise H. Goldstein, a New Orleans native who had come up through the city's school system and earned his degree at Tulane. He wasn't just some random architect either. His fingerprints were already on major landmarks like Dillard University, the Audubon Zoo, and the city's main airport. Magnolia was meant to reflect the soul of New Orleans, not erase it. That vision showed in the details. The buildings leaned into a colonial style, but mixed it with local flavor. Cast iron columns, detailed grillwork, balconies, courtyards. These weren't just apartments. They were spaces designed to feel alive. Courtyards turned into gathering spots, almost like open-air stages. Inside, the units had fireplaces and stair railings. The goal was community, not containment. The location mattered too. Right next door sat Flint Goodrich Hospital, the main medical facility for Black residents and the birthplace of the city's first 3 Black mayors. For more than 20 years, from the early 1950s through the late 1970s, Magnolia was managed by Cleveland Joseph Pete, whose name the complex would later carry. Then, the 1980s hit, crack arrived, and Magnolia changed fast. What had once been a tight-knit community turned into a battleground. Control of space shifted from families to cliques. The rules weren't written down, but everybody knew them. Violence spiked so badly that authorities set up a police substation right inside the project. Magnolia earned a new nickname, Wild Magnolia, and it stuck. This didn't happen because people were broken. It happened because the system was. Packing generations of poverty into one dense block with no real investment, no opportunity, and no exit was a recipe for disaster. Magnolia wasn't allowed to fail. It was designed to. Out of that pressure came names that echoed far beyond New Orleans. Street groups like the Four Horsemen, the Dooney Boys, Bird Gang, and the Hot Boys all trace their roots to Magnolia. Most people know the Hot Boys as the rap group that launched Juvenile and Turk into stardom. In the streets, though, that name meant something else entirely. Before it was music, the Hot Boys were a street crew. 4 figures stood at the center: Dooney, Sterling, Mosquito, and Gangsta. They ran serious operations across the city, and the cost was brutal. One by one, lives were lost. Dooney's name lived on through the Dooney Boys, while Terrence Williams, Birdman's brother, and the last surviving member, was eventually sentenced for much of what the crew had done. It was a cruel contrast. The Hot Boys brand became a global success in music, while the original men behind the name were swallowed by the streets that created them. Music became the escape route for the next generation. In New Orleans, the streets and the music scene don't just intersect, they mirror each other. Artists like Birdman, Juvenile, and Turk use rap as a way out, turning survival stories into records. Juvenile never pretended Magnolia was anything else. He described it as a non-stop hub of drugs and violence where even holidays weren't safe. Not everyone escaped. Magnolia Shorty, a local star raised in the projects, was killed in 2010, not far from where she grew up. Her death remains unsolved, another reminder that talent alone didn't guarantee safety. By the late 1990s, the city was already clearing residents out. When Hurricane Katrina hit in 2005, only a small population remained. The storm emptied what was left. In 2006, federal authorities announced the demolition of thousands of public housing units across the city, including Magnolia. Lawsuits followed. Meetings stretched for hours, but the decision stood. By 2008, Magnolia was gone. In its place rose Harmony Oaks, a mixed-income development meant to symbolize a new chapter. Today, only one original building remains, preserved on the corner of Frere and Louisiana. Queensbridge Houses sit quietly along the East River in Long Island City, but don't let the calm fool you. This place carries weight, history, pressure, stories layered on top of stories. It's one of the largest public housing developments in North America, owned by Niche, and it's split clean down the middle. The North houses on 41st Avenue and the South houses on 41st. Together, they hold nearly 3,000 apartments spread across 29 identical buildings, home to more than 6,000 people. Every building, every stairwell, every courtyard has seen something. NYCHA itself is a giant. It's the biggest landlord in New York City, controlling around 178,000 apartments and housing roughly 5% of the city's population. Queensbridge is just one part of that machine, but culturally, it punches way above its weight. This is where Nas grew up, where Mobb Deep sharpened their reality rap sound, where Marley Marl, Roxanne Shante, Black Poet, and even future NBA champion Ron Artest learned how tough the world could be before it ever showed them love. Walk through Queensbridge and the buildings feel familiar. That plain federal public housing look. Flat colors, no flair. When it opened in 1939, the goal wasn't beauty, it was survival on a budget. Corners were cut everywhere. Apartments were smaller than average. Elevators were built to stop only on the first, third, and fifth floors just to save money. Efficiency over comfort, always. But there was intention in the design too. The buildings form a strange shape, almost like two Ys joined at the base. That wasn't random. It was done to let more sunlight hit the apartments, to keep courtyards open, to give residents air and space. Money was saved indoors, then poured back outside. That choice shaped Queensbridge into something closer to a public neighborhood than a sealed-off project. In the early years, Queensbridge wasn't defined by violence. In the 1940s and early 50s, income levels were mixed. Middle-income and low-income families lived side by side, something rare for the time. But policy shifts changed everything. By the late 50s and early 60s, middle-income families were quietly pushed out. What remained was concentrated poverty, and with it came pressure that had nowhere to escape. By the 1980s and 90s, Queensbridge was in trouble. Drugs flooded in. The crack epidemic turned courtyards and hallways into open-air markets. Violence followed. In 1986, Queensbridge recorded more murders than any other housing project in New York City. Kids grew up watching deals go down in plain sight, families learned which routes to avoid at night, and fear became part of the daily routine. That atmosphere lingered for decades. In 2005, police arrested 37 members of a gang known as the Dream Team, who were running a major drug operation directly out of the complex, pulling in around $10,000 a week. It was another reminder that Queensbridge wasn't just battling neglect, but deeply rooted systems that thrived in it. The struggle showed up in the schools too. PS 111, a local elementary school serving many Queensbridge families, made headlines in 2015 after being labeled one of the most dangerous schools in Queens for the second year in a row. Reports of violence shocked parents. One incident involved teenagers running an unofficial tutoring session that spiraled into something disturbing, forcing first graders to fight each other for entertainment. It was a moment that captured how badly the system had failed the youngest residents. Still, Queensbridge didn't give up. By the mid-2000s, serious efforts were underway to reclaim the space. The focus shifted outward toward public life. Trees were planted, playgrounds rebuilt, green spaces expanded, libraries and community centers opened. A central commercial hub was introduced to bring services closer and generate revenue for maintenance. One of the most powerful changes came from the seniors. Partnering with NY Cares, older residents took charge of the green spaces, building vegetable gardens and hoop houses that allowed food to grow year-round. Those gardens became meeting points where kids learned from elders, and the gap between generations narrowed. At the center of it all sits the Jacob Rees Community Center. It's the heartbeat of Queensbridge. Mornings belong to seniors and gardeners. Afternoons filled with kids attending tutoring sessions, sports programs, and computer classes. Immigrants take ESL courses. Neighbors attend health workshops and wellness screenings. Community meals bring people together around shared tables, grown partly from the same soil just outside, but the tension never fully disappears. Even today, progress and fear live side by side. The community's own online spaces reflect that reality, mixing announcements about art and events with reports of robberies, stabbings, and shootings. Hope and caution posted right next to each other. The Lewis Heaton Pink Houses, but everybody just calls them the Pinks. They went up in 1959, 22 big 8-story buildings holding about 1,500 apartments stacked right on top of each other. From the outside, the name sounds soft, almost friendly, but the people who live there tell a very different story. To them, the Pinks isn't sweet at all. It's pressure, stress, and survival. One of the first things that hits you is the stairwells. No lights, no visibility, just dark concrete tubes where anything can happen and nobody can see it coming. That alone makes the place feel unsafe, but mix that with how common illegal guns are, and now everybody's tense, residents and police included. Nobody really relaxes here. Then there's the upkeep, or lack of it. Trash sits out front longer than it should, piling up faster than it gets removed. The smell sticks in the air, especially in the summer. It's one of those things that sounds small until you're living in it every day. Then it becomes another reminder that this place isn't being taken care of. Back in 2005, the Pinks became famous for the worst reason possible. A gang calling themselves the Pink Houses crew started making noise all over the city. They were tied to violent robberies, especially hitting jewelry stores, and people along the expressway started finding victims they'd beaten and dumped. That name, Pink Houses, started meaning danger far beyond the block. Even now, the energy hasn't really changed. Gunshots on a Saturday night don't shock anybody. They're expected. Once it gets dark, a lot of folks just stay inside. Doors locked, lights low, curtains drawn. Not because they want to, but because they feel like they have to. And the fear doesn't only come from the streets. In 2014, a 28-year-old resident named Akai Gurley was walking through one of those same dark stairwells when he was shot and killed by an NYPD officer. He was unarmed. He wasn't bothering anyone. He was just walking. What made the whole thing feel even colder were the reports that came after. That the officer and his partner argued for nearly 20 minutes about who should call it in before they even tried to help him. Akai bled out on that stairwell floor. In February 2016, the officer was convicted of manslaughter. So when people talk about the Pinks, they're not just talking about buildings. They're talking about a place where danger feels built into the walls, where fear comes from every direction, and where just making it home at night can feel like a small victory. Like a lot of big housing projects from that era, Cabrini Green was supposed to be a fresh start for Chicago. On paper, it looked beautiful, a bold plan, a clean slate. The Chicago Housing Authority rolled it out in stages over about 20 years, stacking tower after tower across 70 acres on the north side, selling it as the future. But real life hit different. Not long after people moved in, the cracks started showing. Families already dealing with poverty got dropped into a system that didn't protect them, didn't support them, and didn't really care once the ribbon was cut. Drugs flooded in. Violence followed right behind it. And day by day, that dream everybody talked about slowly turned into something folks were just trying to survive. By October of 1992, things hit a horrifying breaking point. A sniper posted up on the 10th floor of one of the buildings and opened fire with an AR-15, killing a 7-year-old boy. Police were parked close by when it happened, but that didn't stop anything. What made it even heavier was the fact that this wasn't some isolated moment. That child was the third elementary school student from that neighborhood killed in just 7 months. The place got so bad that even the people in power felt the pressure to prove something. Back in 1981, Mayor Jane Byrne and her husband moved into Cabrini Green to show they stood with the residents and were serious about change. Cameras followed her in. Promises followed her in too. She lasted 3 weeks. After 21 days, she moved right back out. And for the people who stayed, fear wasn't a headline. It was everyday life. People were scared to leave their apartments. Kids learned early which stairwells to avoid, which hallways to run through, and which ones not to step into at all. In 1997, one of the most disturbing crimes in the project's history went down. A 9-year-old girl was trapped in a stairwell and attacked. The man didn't just assault her, he sprayed cockroach repellent into her mouth and carved gang symbols into her stomach. She was left in a coma for weeks. She survived, but the damage never went away. She lost her ability to speak and was paralyzed from the neck down. Cabrini Green became more than a neighborhood. It became a symbol, a warning, a place people whispered about. It even became the setting for the horror movie Candyman in 1992 because the director said the fear there felt real, thick, and heavy, like you could feel it in the air. Eventually, the city had to admit what nobody wanted to say out loud. It couldn't be fixed. The experiment failed, so they started tearing it down. Demolition began in the late 90s, and by 2011, the final high-rise was gone. What was left behind wasn't just empty land. It was a story about what happens when hope gets built fast, but care and protection never follow it in. The story of the Robert Taylor homes really starts with where they were built. The Chicago Housing Authority originally wanted to spread public housing across cheaper land in mostly white neighborhoods, creating integrated communities. That idea didn't survive contact with politics. White aldermen and residents shut it down fast. Their resistance forced the CHA to shove the entire project onto State Street, right in the heart of the city's Black Belt. It wasn't accidental, it was containment. For the people already living there, the move came with mixed emotions. The old housing was collapsing. No water, no sanitation, barely livable. So when brand new high rises appeared, many residents saw them as an upgrade. Clean apartments, indoor bathrooms, space for families. At first glance, it felt like a step forward, but the design choices told another story. The CHA originally planned smaller, low-rise buildings. Budget cuts and a push for modernist architecture changed everything. What rose instead were 28 identical towers, each 16 stories tall, stretching nearly 2 miles along State Street. Gray concrete, red brick, cold and repetitive. They stood over the neighborhood like walls instead of homes. Inside, the basics were covered. Apartments had kitchens, bathrooms, and 3 to 5 bedrooms to accommodate large families. Laundry rooms sat in the basements. But that focus on big families created a serious imbalance. The population skewed heavily toward children, about 3 kids for every adult. Compared to the rest of Chicago, it wasn't even close. That imbalance mattered. From the beginning, the project struggled. There weren't enough jobs nearby, there weren't enough safe places to play. Adult supervision was stretched thin. Gangs didn't wait long to fill the vacuum. The buildings themselves didn't help. Chain-link fencing wrapped around balconies. Elevators broke constantly and stayed broken. Maintenance money never came back into the buildings. The place felt more like a holding facility than a neighborhood. There were attempts at community. Health clinics opened. Resident-owned grocery stores operated inside the complex. Between the towers were massive green spaces meant to bring light, air, and togetherness. But those open areas backfired. With no trees, no clear paths, and huge distances between buildings, they felt empty and exposed. Instead of connecting people, they isolated them. Crime didn't just move in, it settled. Money was always the quiet killer. Chicago and Illinois were obsessed with cutting costs, and public housing paid the price. Within a few years, the buildings started falling apart. As conditions worsened, crime tightened its grip. By the numbers alone, the situation was brutal. Around 95% of residents were unemployed. Drug sales were estimated at tens of thousands of dollars a day. The project wasn't just poor, it was economically trapped. Many critics blame modernist architecture for the failure, but design was only half the problem. The CHA slowly walked away. The project had been intended for low-income, 2-parent families, but management collapsed under the weight of applications and weak enforcement. Evictions were rare, budgets were slashed. By the 1970s, upkeep was nearly impossible. At the same time, Chicago's industrial backbone was disappearing. Stockyards closed, steel mills shut down. Jobs that once supported Black families vanished. With fewer employed tenants, rental income dropped and maintenance suffered even more. To keep units filled, the CHA shifted almost entirely to renting to extremely poor, single-parent households. Poverty became concentrated, not managed. By the 1990s, the Robert Taylor homes were in full decay. Even the housing authority labeled parts of it the worst slum area in the country. One section earned the nickname The Hole. It was controlled by the Mickey Cobras, locked in violent turf wars with the gangster disciples. Children as young as 12 were pulled into gang life. Violence wasn't occasional, it was routine. Chicago as a whole was dealing with rising crime, but the Taylor homes were on another level. In 1993, estimates suggested residents had more than a 10% chance of being a victim of violent crime. 1 in 10. That wasn't a neighborhood, that was survival math. The real plague wasn't just crime, it was neglect. Years of segregation, poverty, and abandonment turned the buildings into breeding grounds for violence. The city's response only made things worse. Barbed wire went up, police sweeps rolled through. Instead of safety, residents got stigma. Instead of help, they got treated like inmates. Eventually, the entire public housing philosophy changed. Smaller, mixed-income developments replaced massive high-rise projects. Between 2005 and 2007, the towers came down. Families were displaced, handed Section 8 vouchers, and pushed into the private market. Today, the concrete giants are gone. In their place stands Legend South, low-rise homes, mixed incomes, quieter streets. Back in the 1940s, Jordan Downs wasn't even meant to last. It was thrown together as temporary housing for war workers out in Watts. But once the war ended, the building stayed, and by the early 50s, the city quietly turned them into permanent public housing. The name itself is different from most projects. It wasn't named after some politician or general, but after two regular people from the area, David Starr Jordan and Samuel Elliott Downs, longtime local residents whose names ended up stamped onto the place. At first, Jordan Downs was somewhat mixed racially. That didn't last long. By the mid-60s, because of racist housing rules across Los Angeles and a steady wave of black families moving west looking for opportunity, the complex shifted into a mostly black community. As that happened, the city's support didn't follow. Jobs were scarce, money was tight, and the relationship between the people and the police was already tense. All of that pressure kept building until 1965, when it finally exploded into the Watts Uprising. For 6 straight days, the whole area was on fire, literally and emotionally. A 50-square-mile stretch of the city was pulled into it. By the end, 34 people were dead, over 1,000 were injured, and hundreds of buildings were damaged or burned down. Jordan Downs sat right in the middle of that storm. After that, the neighborhood never really caught a break. In the 80s and 90s, the violence shifted shape and became more about gangs, drugs, and territory. The same problems were still there, just wearing different clothes. Tension with law enforcement kept playing a role too, often acting like a match dropped into dry grass. Even now, Jordan Downs and Watts are usually talked about in terms of crime and poverty. A lot of adults can't find steady work. Many families are surviving on very little money, and safety is always on people's minds. Over 1 decade, from 2000 to 2011, 25 people lost their lives inside the complex. In just 1 year, 2006, there were nearly 20 gang-related shootings and 7 deaths. The area is known as the home base of the Grape Street Crips, a gang that held so much control at one point that people joked and sometimes seriously believed that you needed their approval before you could move in. That's how deep the street politics ran. Physically, the place even looks heavy. There are over 100 two-story buildings, each marked with big block numbers, sitting on dry dirt and thin patches of grass. The layout feels more like a compound than a neighborhood, more like rows of barracks than a place meant to raise families. In 2020, the city finally announced a major plan to change that. The Housing Authority of Los Angeles rolled out a massive $1 billion redevelopment project aimed at rebuilding Jordan Downs from the ground up. Part of that includes a new 92-unit apartment complex funded through a multi-million-dollar loan meant for families earning between 30 and 80% of the area's median income. They brought in big partners like Bridge Housing and the Michaels organization because the plan isn't just about housing, it's about trying to rebuild the whole environment. The vision includes new stores, job spaces, childcare centers, parks, and other things the community has been missing for decades. The promise is that all of this will happen without pushing out the people who already live there. And if the plan reaches the finish line the way it's supposed to, Jordan Downs will end up with over 1,500 new housing units, mixing affordable and market-rate homes in one space. Nestled in the heart of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, sits the Marcy Houses, what everybody just calls the Marcy Projects. The place is named after William L. Marcy, a big-time 1800s politician who once ran New York and later became a top guy in the U.S. government. But that history feels far away when you're standing in the middle of the complex. Marcy was finished in 1949, not long after World War II ended. It's huge, 27 six-story buildings packed with more than 1,700 apartments and roughly 4,500 people. That's thousands of lives stacked on top of each other, all moving through the same courtyards, stairwells, and corners every single day. Most people know Marcy because of Jay-Z. It's where he grew up, and it's where a lot of his story started. The reputation Marcy carries didn't come from nowhere. It got burned into music, into memory, into the way people talk about the place. Jay-Z even gave it the nickname Murder Marcyville because of how dangerous it felt back then. In his music, he talked about the poverty, the guns, the crack epidemic, and how fast life could get taken away. The danger wasn't some distant threat. It was right there every day, and people had to move like anything could happen at any moment. Because of that, police were always around. Sirens, patrol cars, and officers on the block became part of the scenery. Between gang beefs and gunshots echoing through the night, living in Marcy meant living on edge. In 2014, a turf war broke out that left 4 teenagers shot and one of them dead. Just another chapter in a long list of violent moments tied to the projects. But to really understand how Marcy got this reputation, the story has to go back to the 1980s. That's when crack flooded the neighborhood and everything shifted. The drug took over homes, families, and futures. It got so bad that kids were standing on corners selling just to help keep the lights on in houses where parents were hooked. Jay-Z was one of those kids who got pulled into that world. He sold crack in Marcy as a teenager, trying to survive the only way he knew how at the time. And the violence didn't start with the drug game either. When he was just 9 years old, a gang member stabbed his uncle to death. That kind of trauma shapes how a person sees the world. Then, in December of 2015, things hit another breaking point when 2 police officers were shot and killed just a block away from Marcy. After that, the heavy police presence that had once been constant started to thin out. For some residents, that felt like a relief because they felt the cops often brought more tension than peace. But for others, it created a new fear, a feeling that if something went wrong, nobody might be there to stop it.